Hello everyone, welcome to StoicVibe channel. In the silent chambers of the human soul lies a profound mystery that has fascinated philosophers and psychologists alike. The question of authentic existence. What does it mean to truly be oneself in a world that constantly demands conformity? You know what's wild? Most people will go their entire lives never answering that question. They'll wake up, put on the mask, go through the motions, and call it living. But deep down, there's this quiet ache, a sense that something's off, not broken, just buried. And it's not that you don't have strength, it's that the world taught you to doubt it, to trade authenticity for acceptance, to stay silent just to keep the peace. But here's the truth no one tells you. Your greatest power isn't something you find out there, it's something you uncover in here. The Stoics had this belief that peace isn't found in changing the world, but in mastering your response to it. That real strength doesn't shout, it stands still. Stoicism isn't about being emotionless, it's about being unshakable. And in a time where everything is loud, performative, and hollow, the person who chooses to live aligned with their truth becomes a rare force, quiet, firm, magnetic. This video isn't about surface-level motivation. It's not about fake it till you make it. It's about remembering what life tries to make you forget, that you were never powerless, you were just distracted. If what we're building here speaks to something deep in you, if it reminds you of what you've always known but maybe stopped trusting, then there's one small free favor I'd ask. Hit that subscribe button. It helps us grow this space, this community of people who are done pretending and ready to live with clarity, courage, and timeless power. You ever catch yourself going through the motions day after day, feeling like something's missing, but you can't quite name it? Like life's gotten so loud, so crowded, so scripted, that you're not sure where you went in the middle of it all. There's work, obligations, people expecting you to be this or that. And somewhere along the way, you started living from the outside in, shaped more by pressure than by purpose. Let's slow that down, not just your pace, but your perception, because underneath all the layers, the roles you play, the masks you wear, the opinions you swallow, is someone you may not have met in a long time. You. And I'm not talking about the version you present to the world. I'm talking about the version that exists when no one's watching, the one who doesn't need validation to breathe, the one who still remembers what it feels like to be whole. Here's what the Stoics believed. Man conquers the world by conquering himself. That was Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, and it still holds. Because real strength
doesn't start in the gym or on some stage. It starts in the mind. It starts when you stop trying to be impressive and start being honest. You can't fix what you haven't faced, and you can't face what you've never acknowledged. Aristotle once said, "Knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom." And yet it's the one thing most people never slow down enough to do. Why? Because silence is uncomfortable. Because being alone with your thoughts can feel like staring into a mirror that doesn't lie. But that mirror, it's the beginning of your power. See, the world will always try to tell you who to be, loudly. Your job wants efficiency. Your social circle wants familiarity. Social media wants perfection, and every time you adapt without checking in with yourself, you drift further from your center. You become, as Jung once described, a persona, a mask for the collective. Jung warned us that the more we identify with this persona, the more we lose touch with the authentic self. And without the authentic self, we're just performing. But here's the thing. You weren't born to perform. You were born to live awake, aligned, and aware. That only happens when you start tuning in instead of tuning out. And I get it. Life doesn't make it easy. Everything is built to distract you. But power begins when you turn the noise down. Not forever, just long enough to hear yourself again. Start with 15 minutes. That's it. No phone, no background noise, just a blank page and a pen. Don't overthink it. You're not writing for anyone but yourself. Ask questions that matter. What am I pretending not to feel? What part of me have I ignored to fit in? What would my life look like if I stopped apologizing for being me? Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That's not a threat. It's a wake-up call. If you never ask who you really are, you'll end up living someone else's story. You'll spend years climbing a ladder only to realize it was leaning on the wrong wall. But when you start observing instead of performing, something shifts. You notice what energizes you and what empties you. You catch the lies you've believed. I'm not enough. I have to earn love. I need to keep people happy to be safe. And once you see those stories, you get to rewrite them. That's the power of awareness. It doesn't just heal, it transforms. Plato once said, "The first and best victory is to conquer self." That's the challenge and the reward, because self-awareness isn't some self-help cliché. It's the root of discipline. It's the start of inner peace. It's the reason you stop breaking your own heart and start building your real life. You know those moments when someone says something small and it hits you like a truck? Or when a situation unfolds that feels oddly familiar, like you've lived it before, just with different people and different details? That's not random. That's not just bad luck.
That's a sign, a pattern, a reflection. There's a part of you you've probably tried to keep tucked away, the part that feels too much or not enough, the insecure part, the jealous part, the part that still aches from something that happened years ago, even if you've buried it under distractions, achievements, or smiles. Carl Jung called this hidden space the shadow, and it's not some spooky psychological concept. It's real, it's active, and it's running the show more than you might think. The Stoics believed in facing the self fully, not just the polished parts we present to the world, but the uncomfortable, messy stuff too. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That includes the parts of your mind you'd rather not see. Because here's the truth. What you avoid doesn't go away. It grows. And eventually, it leaks out through anger, self-doubt, self-sabotage, overreactions. Think of it like this. If you're constantly triggered by rejection, it might not be about the other person. It might be about an old wound that never got acknowledged. If you always feel like you're not enough, no matter what you do, maybe you've been chasing external proof instead of giving yourself internal validation. These patterns don't just happen to us, they come from us. And once you get that, you stop blaming the world and start reclaiming your power. Now here's where it flips. The shadow isn't the enemy, it's a teacher. It's not trying to destroy you, it's trying to show you where you've been living in fear. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Facing your shadow isn't about becoming someone else, it's about becoming whole. Let's say you always feel unappreciated. You bend over backwards for people and still end up feeling invisible. That's not weakness. That's a signal,
a call to pause and ask, why do I need others to validate me, to feel okay? Where did I learn that? Maybe the real work isn't getting others to see your worth, but learning to see it yourself, even in silence. Plato once said, the worst form of injustice is pretended justice. And pretending you're okay, pretending you've let things go, pretending you're not still hurting, that's a form of self-injustice, because healing can't happen where honesty is absent. So what can you do? Start small. Pick one emotion that keeps showing up. Jealousy, guilt, fear, resentment. Don't judge it. Sit with it. Name it. Ask it what it's trying to tell you. That's not weakness. That's courage. Most people spend their whole lives running from what they feel, but when you sit with it, listen to it, learn from it, you break the cycle. Socrates said, to know thyself is the beginning of wisdom, and knowing your shadow is part of that. It's the difference between reacting blindly and responding with clarity, between projecting pain and processing it. This isn't about fixing yourself. You're not broken. It's about reclaiming yourself, about realizing that every part of you, even the ones you were told to hide, has something valuable to say. So the next time something hits a nerve,
Don't just brush it off. Don't gaslight yourself. Ask, where is this really coming from? What have I been avoiding? What truth have I been too scared to face? Because when you meet your fears with honesty, they lose their grip. You stop being a puppet to your past and start becoming the architect of your future. And that's where your real strength begins. Not in perfection, not in denial, but in radical self-awareness and the courage to own all of who you are, even the parts you were once afraid of. You ever notice how we trust maps, data, instructions, everything outside of us, without hesitation? But when it comes to trusting ourselves, we freeze, we second-guess, we dismiss that little nudge in our gut as nonsense. It's wild, because more often than not, that quiet inner voice, it's right. See, we've been conditioned to believe that logic always trumps feeling, that if you can't explain it, it must not be real. But intuition isn't fluff. It's not some mystical magic. It's ancient, deep. It's your internal signal system, built from experience, memory, emotional patterns, subconscious learning. It's your personal compass, not the one they sell you out there, the one built into your bones. The Stoics didn't talk about intuition the way we do today, but they knew the value of inner wisdom. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself," and mastering yourself includes knowing when your inner world is alerting you before your conscious mind catches up. That sudden feeling that something isn't right, that's not anxiety, that's information. Carl Jung called intuition one of the 4 primary psychological functions, right alongside thinking, feeling, and sensing. He described it as perception via the unconscious. In other words, intuition is the way your deeper self sees what your surface self hasn't processed yet. It's not irrational, it's pre-rational. It's faster than logic because it pulls from layers of knowledge you don't even realize you've absorbed. Think about it. How many times have you sensed something was off but ignored it because it didn't make sense? That person who smiled too much? That job offer that looked great on paper but made your stomach twist? That situation that should have worked out, but deep down you knew it wouldn't. And later, the truth came out, and your gut had called it long before your mind could. Plato once said, "All learning has an emotional base." That's intuition in motion. Your body and emotions pick up on signals, energy, tone, inconsistency, faster than your brain can label them. You don't need a spreadsheet to feel something is wrong. You just need to trust yourself. But here's the catch.
We live in a world that trains us to distrust that inner voice. We're taught to be polite instead of honest, to be agreeable instead of self-aware, to keep the peace even when something inside is screaming. And every time we override our instincts, we chip away at that internal trust. We become better at pleasing others than protecting ourselves. Socrates once challenged, "Know thyself," and that includes knowing the quiet hum of your intuition. Not just knowing your thoughts, but recognizing your signals, your shifts, your whispers. Because when you start to notice those subtle cues, tightness in your chest, sudden tension in a conversation, that low buzz of discomfort, you start to realize you always knew. You just didn't listen. Listening doesn't mean panicking. It doesn't mean reacting to every flutter of fear. It means pausing, observing, getting curious. What am I feeling? Where is this coming from? Is this intuition, or is it old fear pretending to protect me? That pause, that moment of presence, is power, because it creates space between emotion and reaction, and in that space, wisdom lives. Aristotle believed that the aim of the wise is not to secure pleasure, but to avoid pain. And that's what intuition often does. It steers you away from unseen dangers, from toxic people, from wrong paths, not always with flashing lights, but with gentle resistance, the sense that something's off, even if you can't explain why. So here's the real move. Next time you get that gut feeling, pause. Don't rush to label it. Don't argue with it. Don't cover it with logic. Just sit with it. Observe. Breathe. Let it speak before you shut it down. Because that voice, that quiet pull, it knows things your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. You don't have to prove your intuition to anyone. You just have to learn to trust it enough to act when it whispers. That's not irrational. That's what powerful people do. They don't wait for things to break before they make a move. They sense, they adjust, they walk away before it costs them peace. In a world that demands louder and faster, listening to your gut is an act of rebellion, a return to your own inner authority. And once you start trusting it consistently, you stop explaining your energy, you stop negotiating with red flags, and you start moving through life with a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need approval, just alignment. That's strength, not loud, but lasting. And you already have it. You just have to stop ignoring the whisper. It's subtle, sneaky, and everywhere. The belief that in order to matter, in order to be enough, you have to be approved of by someone.
Anyone. Doesn't even matter who. Sometimes just someone outside of you giving that nod that says, "Yeah, you're okay." Now, that's the trap, and most of us walked straight into it from a young age. You get a gold star for being quiet, a pat on the back for fitting in, applause for following the rules, even when those rules cost you pieces of yourself. And somewhere along the way, you started outsourcing your worth to likes, to compliments, to claps, to people who barely know themselves, let alone what you're worth. Aristotle warned us, the worst form of inequality is to try to make unequal things equal. And trying to base your internal value on external opinions, that's a losing game. Because opinions change, people change, crowds cheer today and boo tomorrow. If your sense of self is rooted in their response, you'll be swaying in the wind your whole life.
But here's the flip side. There's a version of you, strong, grounded, steady, who doesn't wait for permission to feel whole, who doesn't need to be liked to be powerful, who doesn't shrink just to keep the peace. And when that version wakes up in you, everything shifts. Think about the strongest people you've ever met. Not the loud ones, not the ones with the biggest followings or flashiest titles. The real ones. The ones who carry themselves like their worth isn't even a question. It's just there. In the way they speak, in the way they hold boundaries, in the way they walk away from what doesn't feel right. That kind of strength, it's not granted, it's claimed. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, said, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinions than our own." Isn't that wild? We spend so much time worrying about being liked that we forget to be true. And here's the thing. Being liked is a moving target. Today you're too much, tomorrow you're too quiet. You sacrifice your authenticity for approval and still feel empty, because applause might be loud, but it's never lasting. It fades. And if that's what's fueling you, you'll always be chasing something that disappears the second you stop performing. Real power, it's silent. It doesn't need a round of applause to stand tall. It doesn't need a crowd to feel enough. It simply is. So next time you feel that impulse to say sorry for taking up space, pause, catch it, and instead of apologizing for existing, try saying thank you, or better yet, say nothing at all. Let your presence speak. Let your energy speak, because your worth, it isn't up for negotiation. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but you'll never get there if you're too busy becoming who the world wants you to be." So let this be your reminder. You don't need to tone yourself down to be accepted. You don't need permission to feel proud of your journey. And you sure as hell don't need a round of likes to know you matter. Your worth is up for debate.
It never was. It's one of the hardest things for people to do, especially the ones who care deeply, who were raised to be nice, who think that keeping the peace is the same thing as being strong. Saying no, drawing a line, choosing yourself even when it makes others uncomfortable. But here's the truth most people don't tell you. People will take whatever you let them, not because they're cruel, not because they're trying to break you, but because they're human. We all respond to access, to patterns, to what's allowed. And if you keep handing out pieces of yourself without limit, don't be surprised when you wake up feeling empty. Boundaries are not punishment. They're not walls meant to shut everyone out. They're filters. They're how you decide what gets to stay in your life and what doesn't, what feeds your energy and what steals it, what brings you closer to peace and what pulls you into chaos. Think of them like spiritual bouncers guarding your time, your attention, your emotional space. The Stoics talked about this indirectly through the concept of control. Epictetus said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." And one of the most powerful ways to respond is by choosing what not to allow. That's the whole point of boundaries, not to control other people, but to stay in control of yourself. Ever notice how drained you feel after saying yes to something you didn't want to do? That's not just emotional exhaustion, it's energetic debt. Every time you override your own needs to accommodate someone else, you pay with your peace. And over time, that kind of debt, it compounds. It shows up as resentment, burnout, anxiety, disconnection from yourself. But something incredible happens when you start saying no without over-explaining,
without guilt-tripping yourself into it. When you stop attaching a 10-minute apology to your boundaries, people begin to feel it. They might not like it at first, especially if they were benefiting from your lack of limits, but they will respect it. More importantly, you will respect it. Aristotle once said, "The more you know you don't know." And when it comes to relationships, one of the greatest signs of wisdom is knowing where you end and someone else begins. Boundaries make that clear. They define what's yours to carry and what never was. Carl Jung talked about individuation, the process of becoming whole, and part of that wholeness is reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away to please others: your time, your peace, your silence, your space. Jung believed we project our own boundaries, or lack thereof, onto the world, and when we don't own them consciously, they show up unconsciously, usually in the form of broken relationships or emotional burnout. So here's a challenge this week. Say no to something big or small. Say no without a speech, without guilt-tripping yourself into it. When you stop attaching a 10-minute apology to your boundaries, people begin to feel it. They might not like it at first, especially if they were benefiting from your lack of limits, but they will respect it. More importantly, you will respect it. Aristotle once said, "The more you know you don't know." And when it comes to relationships, one of the greatest signs of wisdom is knowing where you end and someone else begins. Boundaries make that clear. They define what's yours to carry and what never was. Carl Jung talked about individuation, the process of becoming whole, and part of that wholeness is reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away to please others: your time, your peace, your silence, your space. Jung believed we project our own boundaries, or lack thereof, onto the world, and when we don't own them consciously, they show up unconsciously, usually in the form of broken relationships or emotional burnout. So here's a challenge this week. Say no to something big or small. Say no without a speech, without guilt-tripping yourself into it. When you stop attaching a 10-minute apology to your boundaries, people begin to feel it. They might not like it at first, especially if they were benefiting from your lack of limits, but they will respect it. More importantly, you will respect it.
Because protecting your peace, that's not selfish. It's strategic. And it's not rude, it's required. You can't pour into others if you're constantly leaking. You can't lead a life of meaning if you're constantly managing everyone else's expectations. Socrates once said, "Be as you wish to seem." If you want to be strong, grounded, respected, start by respecting your own boundaries first. Let them feel your no. Let them learn your limits. And let yourself feel what it's like to finally choose you. Letting go sounds simple, but in reality, it's one of the hardest things we'll ever do. Not because we don't know something needs to end, but because we've wrapped our identity around it. The job that drains you, the friendship that only flows one way, the habit that keeps you in loops of regret, even old versions of yourself. The ones that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. We hold on, not because it fits, but because it's familiar. But here's a truth most people avoid. Not everything broken needs fixing. Some things aren't meant to be repaired. They're meant to be released. And the sooner you realize that, the more energy you free up to live, to grow, to become. The Stoics were ruthless about this. Marcus Aurelius said, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" That includes your attachments. If something takes more than it gives, if it costs you peace, self-respect, sleep, or clarity, it's not helping you evolve. It's holding you back. And no amount of justifying, explaining, or waiting it out will change that. Carl Jung once wrote, "We cannot live the afternoon of life, according to the program of life's morning. In other words, the strategies, roles, and relationships that once worked for you may not serve the person you're becoming. Growth requires shedding, and sometimes what needs to be shed is sacred to who you used to be. But that's the paradox. Letting go often feels like death, like something in you is being ripped away. And in a sense it is. You're not losing something, though. You're releasing what was already gone. What you were clinging to was the memory, the idea, the illusion. You weren't holding a person or a path, you were holding a ghost. And ghosts can't feed the living. Real power, it's knowing when to quit. Not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. You've stopped trying to force something to make sense that no longer does. You've realized that choosing peace over persistence isn't failure, it's freedom. Socrates said, "The secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." That's the key. When you stop fighting to fix what's no longer yours, you begin building what is. A life rooted in clarity, not confusion, in truth, not nostalgia, in love, not fear.
So ask yourself honestly, gently, what am I still holding on to out of fear, not love? Maybe it's a role you've outgrown, a relationship that's run its course, a version of yourself you no longer recognize. And then take a step, not a dramatic exit or a sudden cutoff, just one small symbolic release. Write it down and burn it. Speak it aloud in solitude. Cancel that plan you never wanted to make in the first place. Because when you start releasing the dead weight, something incredible happens. You breathe deeper. You feel lighter. You realize you were never stuck. You were just surrounded by things that no longer matched your energy. Plato once wrote, "The beginning is the most important part of the work." And sometimes beginnings don't start with action. They start with subtraction, with removing what no longer fits so the truth of who you are has room to rise. Letting go doesn't make you weak. It means you finally decided to stop settling. And that decision? That's the real beginning of your power. There's something quietly tragic about spending your whole life trying to be what everyone else finds acceptable, only to look back and realize you never actually got to be yourself. And the wild part, most people do it not because they want to, but because the fear of judgment feels heavier than the weight of regret. So they shrink, they edit, they water themselves down just to stay invisible in plain sight. But here's the truth. You weren't put on this planet to blend in. You weren't born to be another echo in the crowd. You came here to bring something specific, something unrepeatable. And the more you deny it, the more drained you feel. Not because you're failing, but because you're hiding. Socrates once said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." Simple, brutal, necessary. Because when you outsource your identity to trends, expectations, or approval,
You trade authenticity for comfort, and comfort may keep you safe, but it will never make you whole. Pretending is exhausting. It's a slow leak of energy that leaves you tired no matter how much rest you get. Because wearing a mask, especially for long stretches of your life, requires constant monitoring, constant adjusting, and deep down, you start to wonder, would people even like the real me if they met them? Here's the twist. Your truth is magnetic. No, not everyone will like it, and that's exactly the point. Your authenticity isn't meant for mass appeal.
It's meant to act like a frequency, drawing in the ones who get you and filtering out the ones who never would. You're not here to be universally accepted. You're here to be unmistakably you. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you're told to be, not who you think people want, who you actually are." And here's the wild part. When you step into that version, when you stop explaining, editing, or softening your edges just to fit in, life begins to align. Opportunities find you. Real connections show up. You stop chasing and start attracting. You don't have to be loud to be real. You don't need to shout to be seen. You just need to be consistent. Say what you mean, stand by it. Live like you are the one who has to live with your choices, because you are. And when that inner alignment hits, it changes the way you walk, talk, and move through the world. Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power. But before you use your power, you've got to own it, and you can't own what you keep hiding." So here's your challenge. Post something this week that's 100% you. Wear the thing you like, even if it's too much. Say what you've been biting your tongue on, even if your voice shakes. Not because you need to make a scene, but because it's time to stop ghosting your own life. You're not here to be tolerated. You're here to be true. And that version of you, the one who doesn't flinch when they're being real, that's the version the world needs most. Let's be real. Life doesn't pull its punches. Everyone's been knocked down at some point.
Maybe it was betrayal that left you questioning trust. Maybe it was loss that hollowed out your sense of safety. Maybe it was failure that hit harder than anyone expected, including you. But here's what most people miss. Pain doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the part where the real story begins. You've heard the phrase, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." But that's only true if you decide to let it strengthen you. Because not everyone who breaks down gets back up wiser. Some stay stuck. Others, they rise. Not by avoiding pain, but by transforming it, by turning it into fuel, by choosing to let the fire temper them instead of destroy them. The Stoics had a word for this kind of transformation, amor fati, love of fate. It means loving everything that happens to you, not just the victories, but the trials too. Marcus Aurelius said, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, the obstacle isn't a detour, it is the path. Carl Jung echoed this when he wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He understood that suffering has a purpose, that it pushes us to confront the parts of ourselves we'd otherwise ignore. The wound becomes the doorway. The scar becomes the map. Think of some of the strongest people you know, not just in toughness, but in wisdom, in self-awareness, in groundedness. They didn't get there by dodging pain. They got there by sitting with it, learning from it, integrating it. They didn't just go through hard things. They grew through them. Pain, when you let it, refines you. It sharpens your insight. It makes your boundaries stronger, your voice clearer, your choices more intentional. It teaches you what matters, what's worth your time, who's worth your energy, what you'll never settle for again. Socrates once said, "The soul is dyed the color of its thoughts, and in moments of suffering, those thoughts become amplified." You get to decide, will this make me bitter or better? Will I close off, or will I rise more open, more focused, more free? Here's something powerful to do. Reflect on a moment in your past that brought you to your knees, a moment that cracked you open. Now ask yourself, not from a place of blame,
but from clarity. What did that pain teach me? How did it change the way I move in this world? Because there's a lesson in every scar. Not to keep you stuck, but to remind you, this is what you've lived through. This is what you've survived. And this is the shape it carved in you. Not to weaken you, but to prepare you for what's next. Plato wrote, "Pain restores order." He believed that through struggle, we remember who we are. We stop chasing noise. We come home to what's real. So don't run from the past. Don't bury your pain. Let it speak. Let it shape you, but never define you. Because every wound you faced has also gifted you a lesson, a compass, a new level of strength. And that's your power source. It's already in you. You just have to tap into it. There's a kind of power that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need noise, dominance, or show. It walks in quietly, speaks less, and somehow shifts the whole atmosphere. That kind of power doesn't come from being the loudest in the room. It comes from not needing the room at all. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm good either way." It's the calm in the chaos, the deep breath in the heat of conflict, the grounded presence that doesn't flinch when things get messy. And here's the secret. That kind of power is built, not borrowed. It's grown through discipline, self-awareness, and the refusal to let your ego run the show. The Stoics lived this principle. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." In other words, you are the gatekeeper. You decide what gets in. You decide what gets to shake your peace. Most people live in reaction mode. One bad comment ruins their whole day. One misstep, and they spiral. They live off of highs and lows, drama and tension, always needing something to push against just to feel alive. But that's not power. That's instability wearing a mask of intensity. When you stop chasing chaos, when you no longer need to control every outcome or engage every conflict, you become something rare. You become a walking sanctuary. People feel it in your tone, in your timing, in your ability to be present without being performative. And ironically, that's what draws people in. Carl Jung once said, "A man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them." True, but once you've gone through that inferno, once you've faced your inner fire and learned not to be consumed by it, you become unshakable. You don't suppress your emotions. You steward them. You don't fight to be right. You choose to be at peace. Think of the most grounded person you know. The one who listens more than they talk, who doesn't argue for the sake of it, who keeps their dignity even when things around them fall apart. That's timeless power. It doesn't age, it doesn't depend on trends, and it doesn't burn out because it's not fueled by ego.